So the quarterback that I'm looking to start is Bo Nix. He has been steadily getting better each and every week. He gives you some decent rushing value. Looking at this matchup against Carolina, we saw what Marcus Mariota did to them last week. He finished as a top 10 quarterback. And all of this sets up well for Bo Nix to be a great streaming option for this week. But somebody that I would be looking to start if he is available is Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns. So this is an example of somebody who gets increased targets with the absence of a player. In this case, Amari Cooper getting traded. And he was very productive with it. He is 14% available. You look at Jalen McMillan, who's 38% available. Likely grabbed by a lot of people, but I think the smarter play for this week that's actually less rostered is Cedric Tillman.
Tight ends in this set. Nix shows off the arm strength, but a one-handed grab. National tight ends day. Adam Stroud says, "It's my day." Winston going for it all for the end zone for Tillman. He's got it.
Everybody, welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. In today's video, we're going to do a preview of Week 9. Believe it or not, we are already halfway through the fantasy football season. We're going to talk guys to pick up on waivers, drop candidates, buy low, and sell high for the second half of the fantasy football season to set you up to win a championship this year. So please comment. I reply to all my commenters on this channel. So if you want to have your questions answered on this channel, you want to ask some questions about your specific roster, this is the channel for you, so take advantage of that. Subscribe to my channel, like this video, and we'll get right into it. All right, so two teams will be on a bye for Week 9, so we are back with our in-sync drop. This is the buy or buy segment. Week 9, we have two teams on a bye for this week. We have the Pittsburgh Steelers and the San Francisco 49ers. So if you're new to this, buy or buy means that whether or not you're going to drop this player during their bye week or say bye to them or try to buy them because is in buying them in a trade, because some teams may not want to hold on to these players during their bye weeks because they need wins now. This is a potential opportunity to buy low on them. So we'll start with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then we'll get into the 49ers, which have some more question marks that are interesting. So with Pittsburgh, Russell Wilson, and we're going to go through each position. We'll go through quarterbacks, through tight ends. Steelers at quarterback, Russell Wilson is a relative buy if you're in a one-quarterback league. I think you could safely drop him. If you're in a deep two-quarterback league, I think he is still a sell candidate. I don't foresee a lot of great performances like we saw in his very first game. So I think if you do have an opportunity to sell him off of that, I would, even though he is going into his bye week. And as of this recording, the Pittsburgh-New York game has not started yet. So we will report more on that in future videos if there's anything that stands out. But in terms of Russell Wilson, relative buy in two quarterback leagues, hold or try to sell. Running backs. So this is a good opportunity on the bye week to potentially buy low on Najee Harris. I would not give up a lot, though, because Najee Harris is not a very efficient runner to me. The one that I would be looking more at buying on their bye week is Jaylen Warren. I think that there's a good potential that he's dropped in a lot of leagues, but I would be trying to hold on to him because I think as the season goes on, we could see him have more of a role in terms of pass catching and provide a pretty good second half value. As long as Russell Wilson is the quarterback, it looks like they're going to be able to get Jaylen Warren involved in the passing game, and that could make him a serviceable backup. Think something along the lines of Justice Hill for the Pittsburgh Steelers. In terms of the wide receivers, great opportunity to buy low on George Pickens during his bye week. He's emerging as the number one receiver. And now that the quarterback plays better, I think we're going to see some more performances like we saw in week 7 for the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver. The rest of these guys, though, unless Calvin Austin goes off tonight, I am not suspecting that he will be somebody that you need to hold through the bye week. And same with all the other secondary receivers on Pittsburgh. I think they are all bye. You can send them to the waivers. And then Pat Freiermuth, not really standing out too much among some of these other tight ends. He doesn't quite get the volume, but he doesn't have quite the upside of some of these other guys. So I don't really see much of a need to roster him through his bye week. He is a bye for me. I do want to bring up the Steelers defense though, because I think that their defense is good enough that if you can hold them, I would. I think that they are going to be a solid, easy top 10 defense rest of the season and a great asset for you in the fantasy playoffs. But in terms of the kicker, Chris Boswell has had a good season. He's been a top 5 kicker this year, but he's somebody that you can send to the waivers because you do not need to roster 2 kickers unless you have Brandon Aubrey. All right. Next, we will go to the 49ers. So some more question marks here with the 49ers, but we'll start with Brock Purdy. He is a great bye candidate on his bye week. Brock Purdy, believe it or not, is the number 5 quarterback on the season. And granted, some of these quarterbacks that have good overall statistics this season have already had their bye week, like Jalen Hurts. But the thing about Brock Purdy is that he has a very negative opinion through the media because he's Mr. Irrelevant. He's a 7th round pick. I've talked about this before. So people in terms of fantasy don't really see him as a serious fantasy asset. But really, over the past 2 seasons, this season plus last year, he's been great for fantasy. And currently he's the number 5 quarterback on the season. He had another top 5 performance this week. You kind of have to ignore some bad performances like he had 2 weeks ago. But he gives you a very consistent floor. And I'm going to talk about this more in our quarterback segment, but he's a great name to target if you have one of these big name quarterbacks that's underperforming, like a Mahomes, like an Aaron Rodgers, somebody that you can flip. Brock Purdy is a very realistic target who is not very highly thought of and is a lot of people's backup. And you could take advantage of that, and I think that could be a very good trade for you. Running backs. So these are very interesting candidates for me. So all of them are going to be buys if you can get them. Christian McCaffrey is a buy. Obviously, the price is higher now because he's expected to come back in week 10. And more than likely, if that owner has held on to Christian McCaffrey at this point through this time, they're not going to sell them now. Jordan Mason, to me, is still a buy, even though there's questions of how much fantasy performance he's going to have rest of season. And then Isaac Guerendo, who we will get into in the waiver segment a little bit more. All of these guys are great running backs to potentially take advantage of, but the question mark is that we don't know which ones are going to be playing in week 10. So if you're going to roster them through the bye week, you have to understand the risks that you may not necessarily play one of those 3 players in week 10. Christian McCaffrey may not be healthy. Jordan Mason may not be healthy, or maybe both of them will be. And then Isaac Guerendo has the opportunity. And then obviously if both those guys are healthy, then Guerendo doesn't play. So you're taking a risk, but I think all of them are good buy candidates with a relatively lower ceiling of what you would need to give up, given that they have this bye week, especially for Mason and Guerendo. And then at wide receiver, so Deebo Samuel left this game again. He's dealt with injuries throughout the season. If you can buy low on him, I would recommend doing so because he is going to emerge as the number 1 wide receiver when he is healthy. Really take a look at Jujuan, Jennings, and Ricky Pearsall. I think there's a good chance that these guys are dropped. I would not say bye-bye to these players. I would be trying to hold them if you can. I would even recommend picking them up on the bye week because with Deebo in and out with injuries, Brandon Ayuk is already done for the season. Both Pearsall and Jennings have a lot of opportunity for them ahead of them that they could take advantage of and could be fantasy relevant. And when Christian McCaffrey comes back, whenever that is, it's just going to open up more opportunity for these receivers. So this is a great chance to buy low and even scour the waivers and see if they're still out there for Ricky Pearsall and Jujuan Jennings as well. And then obviously George Kittle, if you can buy low on him on his bye week, I would recommend doing that. In terms of buy, so kickers have been pretty good for San Francisco. They've gone through a couple with Jake Moody's injury. You most recently had Anders Carlson, who was recently cut from the Packers. Performed well this week, number 1 kicker on the week, but you do not need to hold him through his bye week. He is a bye-bye. If you have Jake Moody still, he is a bye-bye. But do keep an eye on Moody for the following week when he does get healthy. He could be a great asset for you. But no need to hold kickers for San Francisco through their bye week. But much like Pittsburgh, if you can't hold the 49ers defense, I would. But their defense is not as good as the Steelers. And I think if you do need to cut San Francisco, I think you have to. All right, so we will move into quarterbacks now. So if you watch my intro video, I said that Bo Nix is my number one quarterback start for the week, under 40% rostered, and number 2 quarterback on the week, pending what happens Monday night. But Bo Nix, in another excellent game today, or yesterday, he is the number 9 quarterback on the season in 4-point per quarterback touchdown passes formats. He has a great schedule for the next couple weeks. 4 out of the next 5 matchups are Baltimore, Atlanta, Las Vegas, and Cleveland. They do have Kansas City mixed into there, which is tough, but all of those other 4 matchups are great. So Bo Nix is a great player. If you're in a 1 quarterback league, I would recommend trying to pick him up as my top option, because I think that he's got a great stretch here for the next few weeks that they should be able to take advantage of. He's getting more comfortable in the system, and considering that he's the number 9 quarterback, despite how he started this season, he played pretty poorly the first 2 games. He's really been great. And this is a player that I think will hang around the fringe of top 15 quarterbacks this season, 15 to 20 maybe. And I think this is a great serviceable stretch here during a lot of bye weeks. Nix doesn't have his till week 14, so great player to pick up for this midseason stretch. Other 1 quarterback league guys to look out for: Jared Goff, obviously. Been playing great. Didn't really need to be used this week, but the thing you could always count on is that offense is going to be great. And next week they get the Packers, then they get Houston, Jacksonville, and Indianapolis. So he's got a great schedule coming up as well that I think he should be very safe for and give you some great quarterback play. And then in the deeper formats, I want to bring up 2 names that are likely not rostered that I think could be serviceable for you if you have like Jordan Love injury, other type of quarterback problems that you're dealing with. Take a look at Jameis Winston and Malik Willis. So I'll talk about Jameis Winston first. I mentioned it in my last video that he could be serviceable for this week, and he ended up being pretty good in week 8. So Jameis, the one thing you can always get with him is you're going to get these deep bomb throws, and he really rallied the Browns, and he's looking better than Deshaun Watson did. So I think that he's going to continue to have some good performances, but he is going to be turnover prone. Lucky he didn't have an interception at the end of that game. But I think if you're in those deep leagues, I think Jameis could be a serviceable guy that you can throw in on bye weeks, and I would be comfortable rostering him for this week. I would try to take advantage of that. He's very matchup dependent, but he will be a fantasy relevant quarterback rest of season. And then this is a little more hypothetical, and I think more of a priority for the Jordan Love managers, but getting Malik Willis. If he does play this next week, Malik Willis has already shown this season that when he does get the start, he is very good for fantasy. He gives you a great rushing floor. He's actually very accurate and has been pretty solid as a quarterback, minimizing his turnovers, etc. I foresee that if Malik Willis is going to be the starter, it's just going to be the same thing moving forward. And they got a tough matchup with Detroit next week, but I do trust LaFleur will set Willis up for success in this game. And, Mason Rudolph, nothing special, but he had 19 points this past week against this Detroit defense. So Malik Willis, I believe, should be serviceable too if he does play. And then again, in deeper court formats, that these guys may or may not be rostered, but Cousins and Herbert have both been iffy this season, but they both had great weeks this past week. And the thing I like about both these players is that they have a nice rest of the season schedule, which I'll be talking more about throughout this video. But Cousins and Herbert, their offenses are starting to click a little more, and they have a nice rest of season schedule relative to some other guys in this league that are kind of on the fringe like they are. Drop candidates. So Aaron Rodgers, really disappointing game for the Jets today. And his numbers are just not standing out among the top 15. So if you're especially in a 1 quarterback league, you do not need to roster Aaron Rodgers. Even if he is your bench guy, I would be rather taking a shot on a guy like Jameis Winston or Bo Nix, because I think there's just more upside there than what you're getting with Aaron. And then Patrick Mahomes, I've already talked about. He did have a better performance this week, but Mason Rudolph outplayed Patrick Mahomes. And despite having 18 fantasy points in 4 point per touchdown formats. Mahomes was outperformed by Mason Rudolph. So he was the number 18 quarterback on this week. His offense is limiting him. I've talked about this so much on this channel. Try to trade Mahomes, but if you cannot, you gotta just, in my opinion, cut bait, because it's just gonna be killing you holding on to him this season. Anthony Richardson, I've already talked about him as well. I think there's just been overwhelming evidence that you should drop him, especially after a first half where he completes 2 out of 13 passes. Dak Prescott. This was a disappointing game. He salvaged it in that fourth quarter, ended up with 15 fantasy points. But, man, this guy is lucky that he did not finish in single digits, because this Dallas offense is not good. And I think that if you own Dak Prescott, you've got to figure out a way to either move him or look for one of these other guys on waivers. The thing I do like about Dak, though, versus these other quarterbacks I've talked about, is that I think that he will be fantasy relevant in certain games, but if he is your QB1 and you're in a one quarterback format, try to move on from him. I think it's okay to roster him if you have another serviceable guy that you can hold on to, but Dak is not somebody that you want to be rolling out as your number 1 QB option. And then this player, CJ Stroud. If you're in a very shallow one quarterback league, you got to make some tough decisions. And yeah, he's not stood out. I would not try to drop him if you can, because he's very explosive. He's got a lot of value in trades, I believe, but it's very hard to continue to roll him out when you've got all these receiver injuries. They're very successful with Joe Mixon running the ball. It just doesn't feel the same as last year. And I do trust that CJ Stroud can turn it around, but if you're a losing record team, you've got to move on if it's something that's killing you week to week and you've got one of these other guys out there on waivers that's performing better. Buy candidates. So the focus of these buy and sell candidates for this week are going to be based on strength of schedule, partially, and then also off of some past poor performances that I think will still finish well. So I want to first talk Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, to me, he struggled the past few weeks, but T. Higgins did not play. Eagles defense has been better over the past couple weeks. So Joe Burrow, to me, is still a top 10 quarterback. If you could take advantage of this opportunity to buy low on him, I still would. I do trust that he's going to figure it out. He finds ways to turn things on in the second half of the season. I think Joe Burrow will be fine. I'm not worried about him. And then I just talked about this player, but if you can buy CJ Stroud, let's say that you're a team that is, I'm just kind of spitballing, but like, let's say you're 5-3 or better, and you have a quarterback who's been serviceable, but has some potential ceiling issues. Like, let's say you have a Baker Mayfield. You're not sure if he's going to necessarily finish top 10 like he's been performing. I don't think it would be a bad idea to trade for CJ Stroud. His value is probably pretty low. You can maybe give up a bench piece that you may not necessarily need, because the thing that's nice about Stroud is he does have the 12th best quarterback schedule rest of season. Now, the Colts were a great defense for quarterbacks in terms of the matchups, and he didn't really take advantage of that. But with Nico Collins coming back potentially, there is an avenue for CJ Stroud getting better. And if you're a team that has a winning record, can afford to roster Stroud, he could be the missing piece you need to solve that quarterback puzzle. But this is going to be relative to records. And all of this is really who you buy or sell is relative to your team. But this is a player that I would recommend buying if you're winning and you need a quarterback, that you got some questions about your quarterback but are pretty comfortable everywhere else. I think CJ Stroud is a good buy candidate. I want to also highlight some other players that struggled this past week. Caleb Williams had a bad game, but in 2 quarterback leagues, I still think he is a valuable player. I would be trying to buy him because Washington's defense has actually gotten a lot better in recent weeks, and I think that Caleb Williams, you will see him have some great performances and good matchups. Just a couple weeks ago, it was the QB1. So, yeah, I would be looking to try to buy him if you can. And then look into Justin Herbert as well. They have a great rest of season schedule for quarterbacks too. And he has been playing better of late, and you're getting some more rapport with Ladd McConkey. So this is a great potential rest of season play to get Justin Herbert as your quarterback too, that you can get pretty cheap because he has not been a highly performing quarterback relative to some of the other guys that we talked about, but is still very talented. Some of the better quarterback matchups are actually teams that I'm kind of iffy on. Like the Carolina Panthers are number 1 overall. I don't want to invest in Bryce Young or Andy Dalton right now. Tennessee, same thing. Pittsburgh, do you really want to put all the chips into Russell Wilson like that when you don't know if it could be Justin Fields later down the road? Dallas. So that is the argument for Dak Prescott too, but I mean, their offense has not been looking too hot. And then Daniel Jones, Giants are number 5. So you kind of have to don't totally buy into the schedule, because otherwise I would be recommending you to buy Bryce Young, which would not be a good idea, but just it's something to pay attention to though. Now, sell candidates, this is a little more interesting because the number 1 sell defense is Cincinnati. They have the hardest remaining schedule rest of season, but we've seen Joe Burrow against a schedule like this in the past and finish as the QB1. This was 2021, for example, he did this. He also did this in 2022 when he had a difficult schedule rest of season. So I'm not going to be selling Joe Burrow off of that, for example. But some players that I am looking to sell from this past week, I'm looking at more of the older quarterbacks that had some great weeks over this past week, but have some mobility issues and really don't give you the elite upside. So Matthew Stafford, top 5 on the week, but he's got the 30th best strength of schedule. So in other words, the 3rd worst remaining this season. Russell Wilson and Kirk Cousins. Those are all older quarterbacks. Not only is there health issues, but there's mobility issues. They don't give you that rushing floor, and they're more matchup dependent. You might be able to flip them into a player that could be more versatile for you, that struggled like a CJ Stroud, and I think that would be a good deal just based on upside. 2 players that also played well this week that you could look to flip to sell high are Jameis Winston and Bo Nix, who I talked about in your ad candidates, because these guys both played pretty well, but Bo Nix, you can make an argument that, top 10 right now this season. I don't see him finishing top 10 rest of the season in fantasy football. So if you could sell him potentially for an elite quarterback, like I really don't know if you can convince anybody to do this, but if you could sell Bo Nix for Bo Nix plus something else for Joe Burrow, I think that could be a good deal for you, definitely. And then Jameis Winston is a good player that you could trade for a flex, in my opinion, because started off pretty well this season, but you're going to see some ugly games too. But if you guys are new to this, run your trade ideas by me, and I'm happy to give some ideas of some roster moves that you can make and some players to target. And I'll kind of walk you through some ideas I'm thinking of on this channel as well for these players. So we'll move to running backs now. Which running backs do you want to add on waivers for week 9? This was not a great week for running back ads because a lot of these there weren't really a ton of injuries this week except for Jordan Mason. There was a little bit of a Josh Jacobs injury too, but it sounds like he's going to be okay. So if you're looking at upside for this week, the number 1 guy that I would try to add, depending on hypotheticals, if Christian McCaffrey gets re-injured or if Jordan Mason is not healthy for week 10, is Isaac Guerendo. I think he has the best path among these guys that are lightly rostered to move into more success and to assume a 1A role. If both of those guys are struggling with their injuries because of that 49ers offense, and Guerendo has been effective. So if you're looking for an upside play, that is what I would target number 1 among the guys that have the opportunity to get number 1 roles on their team. But then again, you got to wait till week 10. So if you're looking for more of a spot start, though, for this week, the ones that I would look at are D'Ernest Johnson, who I talked about in this past week. The Jacksonville Jaguars, 3 rough injuries to their wide receivers, which I'll talk about in a minute. But D'Ernest Johnson has been the pass-catching running back in the absence of Travis Etienne. Did not play well in week 8, but there is a world where he does get better in week 9. They're going up against a little bit better of a matchup in terms of Indianapolis that gives them the chance to potentially turn some things around for them. And I think that D'Ernest Johnson, there's a world where I see him potentially getting better for this next week. And excuse me, they're not playing Indianapolis, they're playing Philadelphia, which Philadelphia does give up a lot of passing yards. So this is a good opportunity to potentially buy on Dearness Johnson because he could be getting some volume. And then other guys that I like, Miles Sanders showed some promise with Bryce Young in that he got 7 receptions out of the backfield. So maybe that's a rapport thing. I'm more interested in Chuba Hubbard, though, but Miles Sanders is somebody to keep an eye on in those deep leagues. I don't think he's a bad option as a streaming player. Jaleel McLaughlin is somebody to mention of note who is it's starting to look like a 2-committee backfield. There was some other guys mixed in like Bidet, Audric Estime, but it's really starting to look like Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin, with McLaughlin being more of the pass-catching back. So there's a situation where he gets a little more involved. You know, I believe they're playing Baltimore next week, Denver, but that there's going to be games where McLaughlin is going to be involved more. And yes, they do play at Baltimore. So I imagine this could be more of a Jaleel McLaughlin game. So that could be a great spot start for you as well. So Dearness Johnson won because I think they're going to need to fill those voids left by the receiver injuries. Then I would look at McLaughlin. Then I would look at Miles Sanders among those other options. Some other guys I want to mention of note, but I'm not really interested in: Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott. I think those guys mostly got their opportunities because Rico Dowdle was sick and did not play, which was a very unfortunate development. I think Dowdle could have been effective in this game. But the biggest thing that you want to target among these running backs are the handcuffs, because if you own an elite running back like a Breece Hall, like a Saquon Barkley, like a McCaffrey, Mason, like an Alvin Kamara, you want to make sure you have those handcuffs like Kenneth Gainwell, like Braylon Allen, like Jamal Williams, etc. Because really, those guys stepping into those 1A roles are going to be more valuable than picking up like a Jaleel McLaughlin, who could be kind of a dart throw. I think that it would be by far more valuable if you own Breece Hall, for example, to get Braylon Allen. So check to see if these guys are out there. I broke down those numbers the other day that they're still widely available. Drop candidates. Zamir White, rough game. He had negative fantasy points. Clearly lost the backfield to Madison. He can safely be dropped. Any KC running back other than Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco can be dropped. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Carson Steele, Pirine, all those guys can safely be dropped because they're just not getting the consistent opportunities. Sean Tucker had a good game a few weeks ago, but he looks like the clear third back on this team. Ty Chandler did not get any opportunities this past week, strangely, despite being effective at times behind Aaron Jones. And then Zach Moss, I think his value is pretty capped right now. They're transitioned to Chase Brown, who I'll talk about shortly. Buy candidates. So the number one strength of schedule rest of season for the running back position is the New York Jets. And this is a good time if you can buy low on Breece Hall to do so. Jets are in turmoil, but they do have a nice schedule rest of season, and the coaching staff realizes that they do need to give the ball to Breece Hall. Yes, this week was kind of a weird anomaly where Braylon Allen got involved, but I am not worried about it. Breece Hall, to me, if you can buy low on him, I would definitely do that. Other great rest of season schedules, Arizona is number 2. So Arizona, James Conner. James Conner has not had any spectacular numbers this season per se, but he's been consistent, and I think that this is just going to go up a level with that strength of schedule that they have. Arizona, if anything, has developed more identity in terms of running the ball, and that's going to be effective with the utilization of James Conner. If you could buy low on Saquon Barkley after a couple down games where he has not put up the elite numbers that he has in the first few weeks, I would recommend doing so, just because guys like that are going to be fine. Not really worried about it at all. They do have a middle of the pack scheduled rest of season, but a guy like Saquon, you just throw all that out of the water. Other teams that have good remaining schedules, I would highlight Tampa Bay. I think Bucky Irving would be the one to buy because I think he would be relatively cheaper than Rachaad White. Both of them have been playing well the last 2 weeks with more targets from the absence of the 2 elite receivers. And then Bijan Robinson of Atlanta. Atlanta has the number 4 remaining schedule rest of season, so don't think you could buy him anymore. But look at a Tyler Algier potentially in deep leagues as somebody that could be a lottery ticket if Bijan gets hurt. Other guys I want to highlight. So the New York Giants have a pretty nice remaining schedule too for the running backs. And I think that Tyrone Tracy will get more involved as the season goes along. So this is somebody that I would look at as well that I think could be a great play rest of season in terms of their schedule. Tyrone Tracy, to me, as this team continues to lose, they're going to continue to give him more opportunities over Devin Singletary is what I'd like to see. And I'd be willing to take that bet. And then guys that had down weeks from this past week, but are getting the majority of the carries that I think could be great buy low candidates. Start with Aaron Jones. Got all the carries in Minnesota. Rams defense has gotten better in recent weeks. Minnesota has a good offensive system. I think Aaron Jones will be fine. It looks like he's gotten over his injury. Good chance to buy low on him if you can. Chase Brown has had some inefficient games the past 2 weeks, but he does find a way to get into the end zone despite not having a lot of yardage. And Cincinnati is going to, like I've been saying, he's a great buy low candidate for a while. He's pretty much clearly emerged ahead of Zach Moss. I think it's going to be a matter of time before he goes off. I would buy Chase Brown. And then Brian Robinson, down game today, but he is clearly the number 1 running back for the Commanders. Who do you sell among these running backs? So I want to highlight the hardest remaining running back schedule is Najee Harris and the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that is a great chance to sell him. And that's why I recommend to buy Jaylen Warren, is because a lot of times when you have these hard running defenses, you have to rely more on those pass-catching backs. And that's why I think that Jaylen Warren could emerge more as the valuable running back rest of season for Pittsburgh. Javonte Williams is a good sell candidate because Denver has the 31st remaining schedule for running backs. And Javonte Williams lost out on some of his carries, and he's been very much a yo-yo in terms of up and down performances. And I like to go for guys with more consistency. So if you could flip him into somebody that gives you more consistent numbers, that like a Chase Brown, for example. Chase Brown has been a little more consistent to me than Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams was giving you more high upside games, but I think Chase Brown will be a little bit more effective rest of season for you. And then other challenging matchups rest of season, you've got the Cleveland Browns. So Nick Chubb is a good sell candidate despite his name and despite the fact that he's not playing well. So kind of a sell low more than anything. And then Tank Bigsby, they have a pretty difficult remaining schedule too for Jacksonville. And he's, as I've mentioned in a video earlier, if they are not winning, he is not very effective. This is a good game to me to sell Ramondre Stevenson as well off of this performance. And, you know, he has great games, but I'm telling you that the volatility and the up and down performances, it really kills you if you do not feel confident starting him week to week because he just has these up and down games. And in a game like this where he only rushed for 48 yards, but got all the touchdowns that he did, this, to me, is a great opportunity to sell because of regression that's coming. I'm looking at his schedule. They get Tennessee next week. Maybe you'll have one good game there. But then they've got Chicago, the Rams. Then they've got Miami. I think that will be a tough stretch for them. And then in the last 2 weeks of the fantasy season, in the playoffs, they've got Buffalo and the Chargers. So tough remaining schedule for him. I'd be trying to sell Ramondre. All right. And then some other names that could be good sell candidates, J.K. Dobbins. They have a difficult remaining schedule too, and he's been a little less efficient. I think you could try to flip him for some value as well. And keep an eye on that Panthers situation because Chuba Hubbard could be a sell candidate too if Jonathan Brooks comes back. But I would personally be more likely try to hold Chuba Hubbard if you can, because I think that with how bad Carolina is, he'll probably stay in his role. Wide receivers. So, as I mentioned again in my intro, Cedric Tillman, top 5 performance on the week, only 18% rostered going into Sunday. So this to me is the number one wide receiver ad that's out there. He's got opportunity with Jameis Winston. He is getting the most targets among these receivers. I foresee this continuing. I think he's going to be serviceable rest of season. I don't see, like over these past 2 games where he's had 20 plus games. So that's why he's going to be mentioned in the sell candidates in a little bit. But this is a great player to pick up. I think he is number 1 on this list for me. I'd be trying to get Charles Tillman if you can for about 20% of your fab. Jacoby Myers is a little bit cheaper of a buy that you could probably get that would be serviceable as well. They have not transitioned it to Trey Tucker as much. It's more of a Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers situation when he is healthy. So Jacoby Myers, to me, as long as he does not get traded and as long as he stays in Vegas, he will continue to get consistent involvement. So this is a good sneaky ad. It will probably fall through the cracks a little bit. Xavier Legette is another good sleeper option among the players that you can kind of get a sneaky range. Deontay Johnson also in trade rumors, so that sets up Xavier Legette to potentially be a good long-term receiver for them. Keon Coleman may have been dropped in a lot of places, but still very involved in Buffalo. I'd be looking to try to pick him up for sure. This is a much better wide receiver week on waivers than we have for running backs. And then another sleeper that I want to bring up is Michael Wilson of Arizona. Has played well this season. This week he got another 6 targets. He only had 31 yards, but the target share you like, and he looks like the number 3 receiving option on this team after Harrison and McBride. So Michael Wilson, if you're in deep leagues, this is somebody to look at. And then the real deep leagues, with the injury to Stephon Diggs, who looks like this may be season ending, keep an eye out for John Mechie. Got some involvement. This is a deep dynasty project, but if you're looking at a real deep sleeper, he could potentially fill some void with Diggs out until they get Nico Collins back. So keep an eye out on that if you're in the deepest of leagues. Parker Washington of Jacksonville is another very interesting receiver as well. Got 4 targets in this game. He kind of becomes a de facto 1. So of this list of all those guys that I mentioned, how would I rank them? I would say Tillman would be number 1. Most upside, highest potential to be a league winner for you. Then Jacoby Myers if you just want to play it safe. Then I would go Keon Coleman. Then I would go with Xavier Legette. I think that Parker Washington would be 5th for me, but to me, the biggest benefactor of this situation is going to be the tight end, which I will get to in a little bit. Drop candidates, Demario Douglas. I had high hopes for you, but you've failed me the past 2 weeks, and you've got to go now. Trey Tucker, same thing. I feel like I put more of my emotional investment in Demario Douglas, and that didn't work out, though, but it's time to move on for both these guys. The Packers receivers that are on the fringe, like the Christian Watson and the Dontavian Wicks, are too much of a dart throw right now. And with Malik Willis, I think that they're both droppable. Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis to me. Christian Kirk is done for the season. And then Gabe Davis, you cannot rely on this player. Even if he does come back and he's the number 1 on this team, I would not try to rely on him. The remaining Rams wide receivers, other than Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, have all been phased out. So the Jordan Whittingtons, the DeMarcus Robinsons, all those guys are droppable. And then Tyler Lockett, they've got their bye week in 2 weeks. They got the Rams next week. I think that he is droppable too after a game in which he really struggled with the opportunity minus DK Metcalf, and he only had 1 catch. All right. Who are the buy candidates at wide receiver? So Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you can buy him. A lot of people on the Lions that own Lions are concerned about their target share, and this was a very down week for St. Brown. I believe that he only had 7 yards in this game, and he had 2 catches, which is very concerning for those managers. But to me, he is always going to he of all the receiving options, he is the most consistent. And in this game against the Titans, I think you have to throw away these situations like this where they're just blowing them out. They didn't need to use him. Goff threw the ball. I think he only threw it 15 times in this game, 2 for 17. So when they're in situations where they're going to need to pass more, you're going to have a little more inflation of these values. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the one to buy, but I will be talking about some Lions later that you want to sell. Jayden Reed to me is another buy candidate because he is the number one receiver on the Packers. I know that the numbers have been bad in recent weeks, but I do feel that he's going to get things together. And they have the number 5 remaining strength of schedule left this season. So Green Bay's got some important matchups coming up rest of the season against divisional opponents. And they're going to need to use these receivers, and Jayden Reed is their most reliable. So when Jordan Love gets healthy, they get that nice remaining schedule rest of the season. Jayden Reed, great buy candidate. I'd be looking to try to get him and Amon-Ra St. Brown as my top 2, but Reed to me is a little more realistic to get. The Bears wide receivers are all very interesting too. They have the number 1 remaining schedule for wide receivers. And the only reason I don't rank them higher is because Chicago, they've got multiple mouths to feed. They've got these guys and Cole Kmet. I think among these receivers, the ones that I'd be trying to buy first is DJ Moore. They'll cost you a little more, no pun intended. But I think that he is the best receiver on this team. Keenan Allen has been, he was on the field for 97% of the snaps this past week. So that would be number 2. And then Odunze would be more of a dart throw to me at 3. I think that Allen would probably be the cheapest to get, but the best value of what you could get in terms of overall numbers to me would be DJ Moore. And then obviously, I mentioned Pickens earlier. If you can buy him, that would be a great opportunity too. They have the number 6 remaining schedule rest of season for wide receivers. I would still be in the business of buying Davante Adams because I think that he's had some bad weeks. I think you can get him relatively cheap, and I think that to fix this sinking ship, Aaron Rodgers is going to fall back on what he knows, which is Davante Adams. I think that he will have some better games moving forward. 2 highly targeted guys that I think will be great rest of season. Specifically rest of season is Chris Olave. They do not have much in New Orleans aside from him. And when Derek Carr gets back, I think that he is going to pop. Chris Olave for sure. And then more of a short-term play, Tank Dell with the injury to Stephon Diggs. I think he will get more involved as well, and you can get him very cheaply. So the wide receivers that have the hardest remaining strength of schedule, the Patriots, not really concerned about these wide receivers. Miami. So what do you do with Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill? Hill kind of transcends this, so I would not be trying to get rid of Hill if you can, but he has been extremely disappointing. So I would just recommend not selling Tyreek Hill because you're not going to get equal value for him. It would be better just wait it out. Jaylen Waddle, though, I think is a decent sell candidate because I just really have a lot of doubts that he'll ever get the involvement that you expect with a name like his. He would be an okay sell candidate for me. I want to mention Cedric Tillman among the guys that I recommended to get on waivers because I think you can flip Tillman for some good value. And they do have a difficult remaining strength of schedule. That is I believe it's the 28th. It is, yeah, it's the 28th remaining strength of schedule for Cleveland. So that is pretty challenging. I do think that he'll be serviceable, and if you can have him as a flex, but I think if you could trade him for a wide receiver 3 or 2, that would obviously be the ideal thing to do with Cedric Tillman. Calvin Ridley is a sell candidate just off the basis of, okay, you finished as the top 5 receiver this week, but what have you done the majority of the season? And that has been highly inconsistent. Will Levis be your quarterback? They have a great remaining strength of schedule. That's number 4 overall remaining, and I believe number 1 in the fantasy playoffs. But their quarterback play is so bad, it's just hard to trust that. I think you could sell Ridley for some good value right now off a performance where he just had 15 targets and over 100 yards. You could also look to sell Zay Flowers too. He has been very inconsistent this season, and they have a difficult remaining strength of schedule. That's bottom 5. So this could be a good opportunity to try to flip Flowers for somebody that could be more consistent for you. Darnell Mooney had a nice bounce back week, but he is a good sell candidate for me because he finished as a top 12 receiver this week. He's hovering around that top 20 range, but I don't see him finishing there. So based on that, I think this is a good opportunity to move him. And then players that you may want to sell low on is Amari Cooper. This guy, he does this continually throughout his career where, he has all the opportunity in the world for him. He's got a decent matchup against Seattle. He's just been traded to a team where they need to rely on him as their number one receiver, and then he gets one catch. He disappears time to time like this, and if you've been dealing with this all season and you have a losing record, I think you got to consider selling Cooper now, because you need to start getting guys that can give you some wins right away and put up some points. And with Cooper, it's a little bit too much of a dart throw. I think you'd be better on the rosters of managers that are winning and see if Cooper can take off. If not, just safely bench him rest of the week, and rest of the season it won't hurt you. Tight ends. A tight end that I mentioned that would be a great start for this week is Cade Otton. He finished as the number 1 tight end, and he's got the number 5 remaining strength of schedule. So if he's out there, easily the number 1 ad. Also look at some other sneaky options as well in deeper leagues. Will Disley has had 7 targets again this past week, and he has the number 6 remaining strength of schedule. So that is a great pickup too. Adam Troutman has the number 1 remaining strength of schedule for Denver, but Denver has some other tight ends as well, like Luke Kroll, that they mix in too, who dealt with some injuries in this past game. So a little more concerned about Troutman rest of the season, but had a great week this past week. And these are all guys to consider if you need a bye week replacement for George Kittle, for example. Mike Gesicki had he had 8 targets for this game, finished above 15 fantasy points at the tight end position. I just don't know if we'll see that with T. Higgins, so I'm not as interested in his performance from this past week. Also want to mention guys that you can drop in the tight end position. Isaiah Likely, if you have not already dropped him, I think you could safely do that. This has transitioned back to Mark Andrews, and he is a little more relevant now. Cole Kmet, I think you'd be getting a lot of up and down performances like this with him. And I think that, again, if you're on a team that needs wins, Cole Kmet is very risky. You want to go for guys that are a little safer. And I was high on Jatavian Sanders, but he did not take advantage with Bryce Young, only had 1 catch. He's droppable now. Buy candidates. So if you could buy Brock Bowers, he has the number 2 remaining strength of schedule. He had a little bit of a down week relative to a lot of these tight ends that played this week. Something about this National Tight End Day. Every year, it seems like they all play well on National Tight End Week, and then everybody seems surprised about it. But I feel like they've been saying this for the past 4 years, so it's kind of, to me, I don't know. It just feels like old news. But anyway, he did not really perform very well on National Tight End Week, and he has the number 2 remaining strength of schedule, and he's easily the number 1 receiver on that team. If you could buy him, and I'll talk through some strategies of how you can do that in a sec. Evan Ingram is another great buy candidate. Because of all the injuries to these Jags receivers, Brian Thomas is going to be out for 2 to 4 weeks. Christian Kirk is out for the season. Gabe Davis is out for unknown amount of time, but frankly, he's out even when he is playing sometimes, because sometimes he's just irrelevant. And this all sets up to me as Evan Ingram is going to feast off of these targets the next few weeks, and he becomes a great buy candidate off a week that he didn't really have a great performance either. 13.6 wasn't anything special compared to a lot of these other tight ends this week. Great chance to buy low on Evan Ingram. If you can buy on David Njoku still, and you may need to include some serious other flex options to do so, he is getting a lot of targets from Cleveland, should be heavily involved, and they have the number 4 remaining strength of schedule for tight ends. Cade Otton, as I mentioned, if you can buy him, buy all of the tight ends that are going to be getting volume. So these guys like Bowers, Ingram, and Njoku, and Otton, they're all set up for success rest of season because of depleted wide receiver cores and getting a lot of volumes on teams that need to rely on them. So this, as a result, sets up well for all 4 of these players as great buy low candidates. Kind of the B to C tier of this list, Hunter Henry got 6 targets again, but the Patriots offense is a little bit limited, but with none of these receivers stepping up, Henry is intriguing. And then Jake Ferguson getting 8 targets for Dallas. I think they will have better performances moving forward, especially Ferguson had a tough defensive matchup this week. So who do you sell? The number one that I'd be looking to sell is Laporta. He had a nice bounce back game for this week. He got 6 targets, but we have seen the yo-yo effect of Sam Laporta's target shares not being there. And I think there's a strong possibility when Jameson Williams gets back, when they need to utilize Amon-Ra St. Brown more, that Laporta goes back to what we have seen with these performances where he falls outside of the top 20 and has single digits. So on the season, he has only had 2 games in which he has had over 10 full PPR points. One of them was on a 52-yard touchdown. That was his only catch and target of the game. And then this past week where he had 6 targets and a touchdown. So to me, this is a good opportunity to try to sell Laporta off a good game in which he finished in the top 10. And I would be trying to target any of those 4 guys that I mentioned: Otten, Ingram, Bowers, and Njoku. Similarly, Travis Kelce is a good sell candidate just off of the formula that he has a lot of wear and tear on him, and he's got a great name value. So if you're going for a Brock Bowers and you're just getting this Travis Kelce game in which he finished top 3 and did better than Bowers, this is the ideal time if you own Travis Kelce to try to trade for Brock Bowers. Because with that name value, with the Kansas City Chiefs, which everything that Travis Kelce has been over the years, if you could get Brock Bowers, who has the number 2 remaining strength of schedule and is more guaranteed to have target share rest of the season, that is the move to make. And this is the week to do it. For Sam Laporta, I don't think you can command a Brock Bowers with that. But I think that those are the 2 names that I'd be trying to flip for some of those type of players, because they're highly draft capital picked players. And if you could flip them for these guys that are getting more targets, I think that would be a great deal for you. So those are the 2 A-tier names. But other guys I want to mention similarly on this list, Tucker Kraft has had 2 games in a row where he's benefited from low target volume but got a touchdown. I'm expecting regression, and they have the 29th best remaining strength of schedule, which is going to make things harder for him. And he's got Malik Willis, so will he utilize the tight ends? Remains to be seen. So Tucker Kraft, good chance to try to sell him off this week. And then Zach Ertz finished in the top 10, but the Commanders have a pretty tough remaining strength of schedule as well for the tight end position. And then another sell candidate too is Dalton Kincaid. Kind of in the same line of what I talked about with Laporta. Kincaid's volume will probably go down with more integration of the other receivers like Cooper, etc. I hope Amari Cooper will get more involvement, but really this team is more focused on running the ball between James Cook and Josh Allen. And I think that Kincaid, there's a good chance that he kind of gets phased out over the past few weeks. So off a game where he gets a touchdown, potentially a good chance to sell him. All right, so we will talk defenses, and I'm going to talk short and long-term defensive looks at which ones that you want to take a look at for this week. The defenses that are good matchups for week 9, New England has Tennessee. They're only 3.3% rostered, so probably one of the most available. The best one that you want to pick up for this week, though, in terms of both week 9 and 10, is the Los Angeles Chargers. They are currently 57% available, so they may not be out there. But if they are, that's the number one to get, because they get Cleveland next week, and then they get Tennessee the week after that, which are defenses that you want to target. Well, maybe not Cleveland now, but Tennessee, definitely a defense you want to be targeting, or an offense that you want to be targeting for your defenses. Philadelphia gets Jacksonville. That's a nice matchup in week 9. New Orleans gets Carolina. Another very good offense to target among defenses. And then Washington getting a lot better, only 20% rostered, and they get the Giants next week. So that is a great sneaky play. A lot of great defensive streams for this week. If you're looking more of a long-term play, another great week 10 option is Chicago getting New England. But then long-term, Houston has the number 3 remaining strength of schedule. And Houston, depending on the league, they may still be out there, or they may be a defense that you could trade for. And I think that'd be a great defense to trade for, because they have talent and they have a nice strength of schedule remaining. And then Buffalo may have been dropped in some leagues with some of the matchups that they face. So they may be out there, and they have the number 5 remaining strength of schedule in the fantasy playoffs. Looks very nice for them too. And then defenses to drop. These defenses were likely highly drafted, but are playing very poorly. The New York Jets just not been the same, and they have the second hardest remaining strength of schedule for offenses, so they are droppable now. They get Houston next week, which I suspect if they only can put up 3 points against the New England Patriots, it's going to be a recipe for a disaster for them. And then Dallas is only the number 27 defense on the season. Both of those defenses can be dropped safely at this point. Kickers. So I'm a little proud to talk about this, but I'm going to talk through the top 10 kickers on the season. But first I want to shout out Austin Seibert. This guy is killing it every single week. He had 4 field goals this week. Number 1 in points per game among the kicker position. And this is a guy that was not the starting kicker on his own team to start the season. So you can go back and watch my videos about kicker strategies and how the best kickers are undrafted and why you should not draft a kicker for that reason. Well, let me go through the top 10 kickers so far in the season. Number 1 is Austin Seibert, not drafted to start the season. Number 2 is Kaimi Fairbairn, probably picked at the end of drafts. And number 3 is Chris Boswell, likely not drafted. Number 4, Brandon Aubrey, probably one of the only value draft picks among the kickers. Number 5 is Will Lutz, who is still available in over 50% of leagues and was not drafted to start the season. Younghoe Koo, late round pick, has been solid value for quite a while. That would not have been a bad kicker pick. Chase McLaughlin, not drafted to start the season, still under 50% rostered. He is the number 7 kicker. Will Reichert of the Minnesota Vikings, also under 50% rostered right now, was not drafted to start the season. And then number 9 on this list, who was reached for in many leagues, is Justin Tucker. So proving my point that you do not want to be reaching for kickers, and if you do not draft a kicker, then that's probably the best thing you could do, because you could find the majority of these guys taken ahead of Justin Tucker on this list. And Cameron Dicker of the Los Angeles Chargers rounds out the top 10. All right, well, that's all that I've got for this week. Stay tuned this week for more strategy videos, and we'll talk some things that you want to look out for in week 9 coming up this next week. So this video did get out a little bit late, had some family stuff going on this weekend, so because of that, it was out a little bit later. But for these future weeks, they will be out on Sunday night to give you a little more time to prep. And as always, comment your questions below about any questions you have on fantasy football and your rosters, and I will reply to it, help you win a fantasy football championship this year. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.